The wind moved low and mean across the flats of Cimarron County, dragging dust through barbed wire and splinters of bone-white fence posts. By spring, the land was already tired, cracked like old knuckles, thirsty for something more than melted snow and good intentions. People were leaving packing wagons, hitching teams, abandoning crooked houses to the mice and wind. The railroad had passed them by, and with it went any promise of revival. No one had faith in the soil any more, least of all Harlan Finch. Harlan was 46 and wore the same coat he'd been married in, though the cuffs had gone threadbare and the shoulders were worn through. He had a look about him like something left too long in the sun. Once he'd owned 300 head of cattle and a young wife who hummed while she cooked. Now the cows were down to 34, his wife dead 5 years, and the ranch, Finch Hollow, stood like a limping thing refusing to die. He drank vinegar water and chewed willow bark for his toothaches. He spoke only when necessary. He turned inward like a wintering beast, except that beasts didn't carry shame like he did. The shame wasn't for the dying ranch or the failing fences or the loans left unpaid. It was for the thing he'd done in the spring of '89, when the river had flooded and taken 2 calves and the last of his hired help. It started with a wagon. It came through just after first thaw, wheels coated in brown slush, drawn by a sway-backed mule and a tired man whose beard was more cough than color. He wore a duster 3 sizes too big and had eyes like boiled potatoes, pale, soft, lifeless. In the back of the wagon was a girl, no older than 9. Barefoot, wrapped in a quilt too fine for this country, eyes like flint and mouth clamped shut. The man called himself Rusk, said he was headed west and couldn't keep the girl. "She ain't mine," he said. "Brother's girl, dead now, him and the missus both, fever. He didn't ask for money, only offered her like a sack of flour, like she weighed nothing. She don't talk much, don't eat much neither, might be she's touched, but she don't bite." He coughed then, deep in the ribs. "You got room, Mr. Finch, just for a spell." Harlan looked at the girl. She looked back without blinking. She had black hair cut in a rough line above her eyes, and her arms were scratched up like she'd run through bramble. There was something feral about her, something not quite human in the way she held herself, ready to bolt or bite or vanish. He took her not because he wanted her, not because he pitied her, because she was leverage. He'd heard whispers, things said by cowhands and drunks about a man named Jericho Hatch, who ran girls down in Clovis and paid good coin for the young ones, especially if they were clean, unbroken. Harlan didn't know what clean meant in that world, and he didn't want to. But he knew money was what he needed to keep Finch Hollow from folding in on itself like a burned-out barn. He fed the girl broth and gave her a blanket, told no one, not the male driver, not the preacher, not even Eddie Cole, the widow who brought him preserves in return for fence mending and nothing more. He kept the girl in the cellar for 2 weeks under the floorboards where it stayed cool and dark. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She slept like an animal, curled and tense. But she watched. She watched him like she was memorizing every tick in his face, every wince in his hand. When he brought her food, she stared into him like she was learning something deeper than words. It made his skin crawl. He told himself it didn't matter, that she wasn't his to keep, that it was mercy in some crooked way to give her a chance somewhere else. When the rains came and the roads turned to mud, Harlan waited. Jericho Hatch sent a letter, folded into oilskin, delivered by a boy with one eye and a pistol on his hip. The letter was short. 1 sentence, meet at Wayfarer's Bluff, full payment if untouched. Harlan saddled his old mare before sunrise, wrapped the girl in burlap so she wouldn't freeze, and didn't leave a note. He didn't lock the house, didn't look back. Wayfarer's Bluff was 4 hours north, just shy of Indian Territory. The trail was lonely, and he passed no one. When they reached the bluff, he dismounted and waited, heart thudding a slow, sick rhythm. The girl didn't speak, but she looked at him with something close to recognition. Hatch came in a covered buggy, drawn by a white team. He was tall, too well dressed for the land, with gloves he didn't remove, and a mouth that curved like he was always about to laugh. His eyes were ice. His men stood 10 feet off, armed and silent. Hatch stepped forward, took one look at the girl, and nodded. "You done good," he said, voice smooth as coin. "She'll fetch twice what I thought." Harlan didn't answer. He held out his hand, and Hatch dropped a satchel into it, heavy with coin, fat enough to stop a man's conscience if he let it. Harlan didn't count it. He turned to go. "Tell me her name," Hatch said. "I never asked it," Harlan replied. He rode home slow. The wind kicked up behind him, and something in him felt hollow, like part of his bones had been scooped out and left behind. He told himself it was necessary. He told himself he'd saved Finch Hollow. 2 weeks later, a body was found strung up by the river mouth. One of Hatch's men, eyes missing, guts hung on a cottonwood. No one claimed him. No one asked. A month after that, Hatch's ranch burned. 3 girls escaped, one died. The survivors didn't speak, but one of them had black hair cut in a rough line above her eyes. She vanished before the sheriff could question her. The town buzzed, but no one pointed fingers. Hatch left Clovis. No one mourned him. Harlan watched it all in silence. He paid off his debt. He hired a new hand. He let the cows roam wider and the fences rot slower, but something had shifted. Finch Hollow was still dying, but slower now. Harlan no longer drank. He no longer chewed the bark. And sometimes, when the wind came up from the south, he thought he saw a figure on the ridge, a girl with black hair, watching, always watching. He never told anyone what he'd done. But the town stopped speaking his name out loud. The girl did not vanish, not truly. The plains kept her. The plains remember everything. By summer, Finch Hollow sat in a brittle heat that cracked horse hooves and spoiled milk in the shade. Harlan buried 2 steers in a foal that collapsed in the sun. Buzzards wheeled wide circles over the ranch, waiting for what would not rise again. He worked in silence, sweat painting his back, hands cut raw from wire and rope. The money from Hatch was hidden beneath a loose board in the barn. He hadn't touched it since the night he'd come back. He thought about it often, but he never spent a cent. The name Jericho Hatch still lived, whispered low in barns and saloons. Men said his wagon was found blackened and bent 10 miles east of Caprock, iron nails curled from heat, one axle sunk in melted sand. No sign of the driver, or the girls. But the girl Harlan had traded, the one with ash-colored eyes and bruised silence, began to surface in stories. Not under her own name, no one knew it, but in glances, gestures, shadows. At the Dustmouth watering hole, a cowhand claimed a stranger had slit a gambler's throat with a branding knife after he'd tried to force himself on a mute girl in the alley. When they went to look, there was only a wet patch in the dirt and 3 cards stuck to the wall with a blade. A queen, a jack, and a joker. In the rail town of Wraith, an old woman who worked the sheets said a girl with a face like stone had come through asking about buyers. Said she carried a coin pouch too heavy for her clothes and asked too many questions for her age. The woman never saw her again, but her dog wouldn't go near the cot where the girl had slept. And in the half-burned remains of a homestead outside Duskwater, 5 graves were found. 4 small, 1 adult, fresh, neat. A single hair tie made of red ribbon was laid on the adult's chest. No note, no tracks, just the echo of something deliberate. Harlan didn't speak of her. Not to the preacher, not to Widow Cole, not to the boy he hired to shovel feed. But every morning he looked to the southern ridge. Then came the day the marshal arrived. Marshal Brecht rode into Finch Hollow with 1 good eye and a scattergun across his lap. He wore no badge, didn't need one, and he rode alone. Word came fast that he was hunting someone. Girl, young, dangerous. Brecht had been in Texas when Hatch's men started turning up like sacks of meat nailed to trees. He'd read the girls' names from court records and marked the ones who hadn't lived to testify. He said this one was different. This one was hunting them back. Somebody made a mistake with her, Brecht said, standing outside the livery. And now she's setting it right, 1 body at a time. The town turned cold. Men stayed indoors. Mothers pulled their daughters inside before dusk, not because they feared the girl, but because they feared being mistaken for the kind of man who might have once dealt in her fate. Harlan kept his head down. He worked longer days, bled into the soil. At night, he dreamed of cellars and burlap and quiet girls with old eyes. His dreams were not repentant. They were not nightmares. They were waiting. Then Widow Cole came one morning in July, breathless and red-faced. "There's someone up by the old windmill," she said. "She's not right, been there since dawn." Harlan followed her up the ridge, boots thudding dull in the dry grass. The windmill had long since rusted, its blades broken by a tornado a decade back. No one went there now, except maybe the vultures. When he reached the crest, he saw her. Not a girl anymore. She stood tall, thin as a matchstick, with boots too big and a coat too long. Her black hair was tied back, hacked uneven. She had a rifle strapped to her back and a hatchet tucked at her belt. Her eyes were the same, flint and winter. She looked at Harlan without speaking. Then she turned and walked away, slow, into the north wind. She didn't look back. Harlan said nothing, not to Widow Cole, not to anyone. That night the boy he'd hired found a pig gutted open at the fence line, entrails draped over the post. No coyotes, no tracks, just the pig, sliced clean and left like a marker. 2 weeks passed, then 3. One by one, names began to die. Thomas Grier, who once ran a stagecoach ring that trafficked runaways, shot through the spine in his bathhouse. Ray Tolliver, who'd sold 2 Lakota sisters to a brothel in Cheyenne, found with his tongue nailed to a church door. Elwood Nash, once a lawman, disgraced, burned alive in a silo with 3 dogs howling outside. Brecht chased her. He rode to each scene with a fury that burned the sand beneath his horse, but he never found her. Only her sign, blood in the dirt, cards pinned to wood, hair ties placed where no one could mistake their meaning. When Brecht came through Finch Hollow a second time, he stopped at Harlan's porch. "You seen her?" he asked. "No. She knew you, that's why she came here." Harlan didn't blink. "Lot of folks know me." Brecht stared hard. "You think this is justice?" "I think it's already done," Harlan said. The marshal left, and Finch Hollow grew quieter still. That fall before the frost, Harlan found something tied to his barn door, a coin pouch, the same one Hatch had given him, still full, untouched. He burned it that night. And when the wind rose howling across the plains, tearing through brush and rust, Harlan stood in his field, coat open, and let it strip the breath from his lungs. He didn't pray, he didn't ask for mercy. He simply waited. By the time winter came, Finch Hollow had no children. The schoolhouse sat boarded, the bell rusted in place. No lessons, no laughter, only the wind whistling through the warped slats. Mothers said it was for their safety, fathers said nothing. There were no more games played in the orchard behind the church, no more chalk drawn on the planks near the general store. The town was quiet in the way a grave is quiet, too still, as if waiting for the earth to shift again. They feared her, the girl no longer a girl, the woman who moved like smoke and punished with silence. Her name, never known, had become a shape in the dark, a figure, a tale told to frighten drunks into confession and make guilty men bolt their doors. But she didn't come for them all, only the ones who'd done something, only the ones who thought no one had been watching. Harlan spent most days alone, mending a fence that never stayed fixed, stacking feed that wouldn't last. His cattle were down to 23, but he no longer counted aloud. He no longer looked for signs of fortune. He was not waiting for salvation. He had seen what came of that. The boy he'd hired left without a word. One morning the bunk was empty. His boots were gone. On the table sat a single coin, not local, foreign-marked, edges rough, a warning or a farewell. In town, Marshal Brecht was still hunting her. His coat hung off his frame now, loose and filthy. He kept to himself at the saloon, drinking nothing but boiled coffee and chewing cloves until his teeth bled. His horse had died outside Duskwater. Now he walked. The limp in his right leg had gotten worse, and he used the butt of his scattergun as a cane. Still, no one crossed him. No one dared. She's playing a long game, he told Harlan one night, standing in the yard beside the broken corral. Each one she kills, she takes something, a tooth, a ring, a finger. Harlan didn't ask how he knew. She's not just killing M, Breck said. She's building something, a count, a shape, and when it's done, none of us will be left. You think you're on her list. I know I am. Then why haven't you run? Brecht smiled just barely. Where would I go? He turned and limped off into the dark, boots crunching over frost-hardened soil. Days later the snow came, not soft, not gentle, a white sheet laid down hard enough to suffocate every sound. Harlan chopped wood until his knuckles split. He ate little, slept less. He dreamed of things buried, faces beneath floorboards, eyes that never closed. Then one morning, he found a box on his porch. Wooden, carved, small enough to hold in one hand. It wasn't locked. Inside was a braid of black hair, tied with red ribbon. Harlan sat down, box in his lap, hands trembling. He didn't cry, but he didn't move for a long time. She had come back, not in person, not with words, but with something worse, recognition. He carried the box into the barn and buried it beneath the feed trough, not from guilt, from fear. That night fire rose on the southern ridge, the Cole homestead, Widow Cole's roof lit like kindling, flames twisting into the black sky. Harlan ran, coat flapping, boots sliding through snow. He reached it too late. The barn was ash, the windows glowing with what was left. And inside he found two men, tied to chairs, throats cut, faces carved. Neither of them belonged there. One was a drifter who'd come through weeks ago asking after trade girls. The other wore a badge from a neighboring county, long since stripped of title. But Eddie Cole was gone. Harlan searched the property. Cellar, smokehouse, creaked, nothing. Then pinned to the doorway he found a card. Not playing, not marked. A drawing, charcoal, faint but careful. It showed a girl in a cage, and beside it, a woman holding the key, walking away. He burned that too, but slower. The town held a meeting 3 nights after, every man with a name, every woman with a worry. The church was full of boots and murmurs, the stove barely warming the space. She's got a pattern, said Caleb Dorsey, the blacksmith. She's moving through anyone connected to Hatch's men. She's killing lawmen now, said Miriam Truss. That marshal may be next. Someone asked about Harlan. He stood near the back, arms crossed. Wasn't he the one who took in that orphan girl, years back? I heard it was just for a spell. She ran off. Or was sold off. The words landed like stones. Harlan didn't speak. He didn't deny it. He let them turn their heads and lower their eyes. Truth has a smell, and everyone knew it now. After the meeting, he walked home through a curtain of snow so thick he couldn't see his own boots. The barn creaked with wind. The cattle were restless. And then he saw her. Not in the flesh, but in the field etched into the drift, bootprints leading to the center of the pasture, forming a circle around the well. As if someone had stood there, watching, waiting. No tracks led away. The next morning he found something hanging from the fence, a chain made of buttons, old, child-sized. He remembered her coat, the one she'd worn in the cellar, how it had been missing 3 buttons. Harlan knew now this was not forgiveness. This was not vengeance. It was a story being finished, inch by inch, until the pages bled shut. And his chapter wasn't over yet. By midwinter, the silence turned mean. Wind cut like it had teeth, shrieking through the gaps in every doorframe. Ice held the ground stiff and white, and the cattle bellowed at dusk with low, panicked moans. No calves were born that season. Nothing new came. Only the slow fading of what had already been. People stopped walking the streets in Finch Hollow. The post stopped coming. Lanterns stayed dark in the windows. It felt like siege, though no one said the word aloud, not from fear of invasion, but fear of retribution. The townsfolk had built their homes on the slow decay of silence and complicity, and now the cold was bringing all of it to the surface. Marshal Brecht dug himself into the jailhouse and nailed the shutters closed. He barely slept. Every night he waited for a sound, glass breaking, bootsteps, the faint scrape of metal. He drank coffee that burned his throat raw and shaved his beard down to the skin so no shadow could hide his face. He kept records, names, dates, rumors, and pinned them to the walls with slivers of broken blade. But he was no closer. "She's changed," he muttered once to Harlan when they crossed paths near the feed store. "Used to leave signs, cards, symbols, now it's messages. She wants us to see, to understand." "Understand what?" Harlan asked. Brecht looked up with both eyes hollow. "What it means to be kept quiet." Then he spat blood into the snow and walked on. That same week, someone found Jonah Murrow dead in his barn with a red stone forced down his throat. Jonah had been a foreman for a freight outfit once linked to Hatch's operations. Nobody mentioned that. They just said the barn must have collapsed, that it was the cold, that it was an accident. But his face had been carved into a grin, deep and cruel, frozen that way. No one came to the funeral. Harlan stayed out longer now, working by moonlight, fixing things that didn't need fixing, rails, troughs, the roof of the calving shed. He knew she was circling. He could feel her presence like a change in pressure, like a splinter under the skin that wouldn't fester, just sat there, pulsing. He didn't speak her name, didn't know it. But he remembered the shape of her silence, the way she'd looked at him that last day on the ridge, like a ledger being tallied. One morning, a figure approached Finch Hollow from the east, not on horseback, on foot, limping, wrapped in a duster too thin for the frost. Harlan saw him first from the bluff, a lean man with a cracked lantern in his hand, bleeding from his palms, coat torn open. It was Jericho Hatch, or what was left of him. He reached town just after dawn, collapsed on the steps of the saloon, muttering in broken gasps. Half his face was burned. His teeth were cracked like old china. "She's hunting them now," he choked. "Not just mine, yours, all of you. You let her rot. You all let it happen." Brecht dragged him to the jailhouse and locked the door. For 2 days, no one spoke to him. Then someone set the place alight. No one saw who lit the match. No one put it out. The building burned slow, with that thick, greasy smoke that means flesh is inside. By morning it was ash and iron, and no one claimed the body. No one even checked for remains. That night, Brecht came to Harlan's door. He didn't knock, just stood in the dark until Harlan opened it. "I was there," he said. "That day, the river flood, I saw you meet the wagon." Harlan stared. "I didn't stop you," Brecht said. "I could have, but I didn't. I thought I understood the math of things. Ranchers needed to eat. Girls like her orphans, well, they weren't meant to grow old." Harlan didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. "She's saving something for you," Brecht said, backing off the porch. "Don't mistake her patience for mercy." Then he vanished into the snow, and Harlan never saw him again. Days passed. On the last night of February, a storm came down from the divide, harder than any in 20 years. Wind peeled shingles off roofs and fences collapsed under white weight, trees cracked like rifle fire. Finch Hollow shut its doors and the land went blind under snow. Harlan sat in his cellar, the same place he'd once hidden her. He brought down a lantern, his old coat, and the rifle that hadn't fired in a decade. He waited, hands flat on the table. Sometime near midnight, the wind stopped. He heard footsteps, deliberate, slow, crunching snow, pausing between each. Then a knock, 3 taps, not hard, not hurried. He opened the door. She stood there in the white. Taller than before, her coat was stitched with new patches. Her boots were clean. She carried no weapon, but her presence was heavier than steel. She looked at him, and he stepped back. She didn't enter. She reached into her coat and pulled something out. A book bound in dark leather, singed at the corners. She set it on the threshold. Then she turned, walked 5 steps into the snow, and vanished into the storm. Harlan brought the book inside. It was filled with names, locations, ages, prices, and drawings of cells, of chains, of girls with their eyes scratched out in charcoal. One page was different. It held his name, and beside it a word written in red ink. Dead. He closed the book and didn't sleep. Not that night, not the one after. The next day he saddled the mare and rode west. He didn't tell anyone, didn't leave a note. Just disappeared into the snow-swept plains, coat whipping behind him like a final word. 3 weeks later, Widow Cole returned. She was thinner, paler, but alive, said nothing about where she'd been. She lit candles in the church. She fed the dogs. She swept her porch. When asked about Harlan, she simply said, "Not all ghosts are dead. Some are just working off the cost." Spring did not come gently. It broke the frost like a bone splitting under pressure, slow and loud. The snow melted in patches, first around fence posts and then down into the gullies. What it left behind was rot, fields drowned in mud, bloated carcasses, rusted tools thawing into uselessness. The river swelled with yellow meltwater and moved heavy under its own weight, dragging branches and half-torn fences with it. Finch Hollow held its breath. There were fewer people now, the trusses left. The blacksmith shut his forge and rode out with his sons before sunrise, leaving the anvil cooling in the ashes. The preacher kept sermons short. No fire in the stove, no hymns, just scripture, sharp and bleak. And always the girl remained in the stories. They called her different names now, the chainmaker, the widow's key, the pale switch. Names gave people shape to fear, but they didn't stop her. Bodies still turned up, not every week. Sometimes months apart, but always marked, always arranged. Outside Grafton, a man was found crucified against a barn wall, with old telegrams nailed to his chest, orders for shipments, dates circled in red. Near Spurline, a body was hung upside down from a windmill, his eyes filled with black salt. No name was ever claimed. And at Dustmouth's edge, a prospector's wagon was found turned on its side. In the wagon, a skeleton curled around a book of ledgers, pages torn, names inked in both English and Lakota. The man's hands had been bound with a girl's locket. Every act spoke. She didn't just punish, she reminded. She made the past visible again, made it so loud that the land itself seemed to echo it. The book Harlan had carried west turned up in a church in Kansas Territory, left on the pulpit during Easter service, heavy with dried blood on the spine. No one saw who left it, but the preacher who opened it fainted on sight. When he came to, he couldn't speak, not one word. Harlan himself was gone. Some said he'd gone into the mountains. Others claimed he was following the girl's path in reverse, unburying each name in the ledger with his own hands. A few whispered he was dead, hung himself somewhere cold, but no one ever found the body. The truth came in bits. A saloon girl in Hawthorne said an older rancher with scarred hands came through and paid off 3 girls' debts in full, no questions asked. Gave them names to use, real ones, told them to leave south toward the water. A rail worker near Bastion said a man brought a satchel of coin and left it with the widow of a freight driver who'd vanished the year before. Said the man's voice was splintered, like something broken behind the teeth. And in a dying town where the mines had collapsed, A child found a blanket folded on a church pew, wrapped around a ring of old keys, each one tagged in red ribbon. The tag read only, "Return what was taken." In Finch Hollow, what remained grew quiet. Marshal Brecht was gone. His office, when unlocked, held only one thing, a single card nailed to the desk, not from a playing deck, but thick and hand-cut. On it was a drawing in black ink of a cage broken open. Above it, in rough letters, "There is no justice without memory." No one replaced him. Eddie Cole walked with a cane now. Her eyes didn't match anymore, one glass, the other too knowing. She resumed baking once the thaw took the frost from her hands. Children who hadn't fled sat on her porch and ate in silence. She never asked them where they'd come from. And on the first warm day of May, the townsfolk saw her. Just once. The girl, now a woman, though no one could measure her age exactly, stood at the edge of Finch Hollow on the old South Road. She had no horse, no cart. Her coat was frayed at the hem, stained dark at the elbows. She wore no hat. Her hair was longer now, bound in a braid that reached her waist. Her eyes were the same, still winter, still watching. She said nothing. She simply stood. For hours, watching the town, as if measuring it, as if deciding. Then she turned, walked into the prairie grass, and vanished toward the horizon. No one followed. That night rain came. Not violent, not loud, just steady, washing over the land like breath returning to a sleeping body. In the morning, the well beside the church was filled with dolls. Dozens, hand-sewn, broken, patched. Some were burned, some stitched shut at the mouth. All of them dropped silently into the water, water that now tasted of rust and pine sap. The preacher closed the well for good, and still no one asked. Harlan's ranch remained, bare, empty, but the gate stayed open, swinging slow with the wind, as if someone had come through or was expected to return. And somewhere far from any map, in a place where the stars shone strange and the trees grew gnarled from age and fire, a figure walked a narrow pass, rifle strapped to her spine, blade at her belt, and a map burned into her memory. Not just of men, but of systems. Names, chains, hands that bought, hands that sold. Not all had been punished, not yet. The work was not done, and her ledger had pages still to turn. By the time the summer sun hardened the roads to clay and the birds stopped their morning songs, only a dozen souls remained in Finch Hollow. They did not speak much, nor gather, nor look one another full in the eye. Something had passed through them, less a person than a reckoning, and left them hollowed like trees after lightning. No one rebuilt the schoolhouse. No one rang the church bell. And no one ever asked where the children had gone, not even the ones who used to carry them. They simply lived. And waited. Beyond them, out in the rough country where maps turned vague and rivers went unnamed, she moved. Not like a ghost, ghosts were echoes. She was the weight that made them scream. She crossed lands where the old tribes had once buried their dead with their eyes open. She passed through smuggler routes and mining tracks, through abandoned camps where the bones still wore shackles and the ground bore the ash of children's teeth. Her ledger had grown heavy. She kept it in a pouch sewn inside her coat now, the pages stitched to hide from wind and rain. Names crossed through in red, dates marked beside them, not all men, some women, a few without titles, but all of them had known, had profited, had smiled through the wrong kind of silence. She rarely slept, ate only when her hands shook. And she was getting close. The final name had taken years to find, not because he was hidden, but because he was protected. A figure behind a curtain, a judge who had once signed papers by lamplight that sent entire boxcars of children west, stamped relocation and rehabilitation, words wrapped in official seal and gold lettering. His name was Wesley Arden. He lived far from where the wind still spoke of hatch and freight wagons and screaming stables. Arden had retired to a green estate in Missouri, quiet and well-tended. No one there asked about his past. He was a widower, a philanthropist. He gave money to churches and orphanages. He smiled for photographs and wore a medal for civic service. And one morning, his front door was left open. The maid found him at the dining table, face down in a bowl of cold oatmeal, blood spread beneath him like a prayer rug. On the wall above his body, someone had painted in crude dark strokes, "She remembers what you forgot." The investigation lasted 6 days. Then no one spoke of it again. Because by then, the ledgers had been released. Not by her hand, but through couriers, riders, strangers who dropped envelopes in post offices and vanished. Stacks of yellowed paper bound in twine, copies of the original birth dates, sales, transports, from Clovis to Kansas City, Denver to Prescott, names of buyers, middlemen, officials, priests. And the girls, thousands of them. Gone, taken, rebranded. Not all had died, but all had been rewritten. Now the pages came unbound, and people began to remember. They remembered that the orphan trains hadn't just stopped, they had vanished. That whole towns of children disappeared between one ledger and the next. That some women, old now, bore scars they never explained. That some men, pillars of their communities, stopped speaking altogether when the documents arrived. Some fled, some begged. A few took their own lives. But most did nothing. Because they knew. And because she was still out there. Some claimed to see her riding alone on old cattle trails, her hat pulled low, rifle across her lap. Others said she had gone north to the borderlands to burn the last names from the last page. One child in Elkhorn swore she'd sat by their campfire, taught them to tie knots, and left before dawn, leaving only a chain of copper buttons behind. But no one ever saw her face again. Not clearly. Finch Hollow never grew. It remained as it was, half dead, half waiting, windswept and half sunk into the earth. People planted things again. They mended roofs. Widow Cole raised goats behind her cottage, and sometimes, when the moon was high, she would sit outside and hum a lullaby no one else remembered. On the gate post of the old Finch place, a rusted plaque was nailed some time after the first fall rain. No one knew who set it. No name, no inscription. Just a carving. A braid looped tight. Below it, a word chiseled hard. Ode. No preacher ever blessed the ground again. No children played past the edge of the ridge. But in the mornings, the fog would rise off the fields like breath, and once, only once, a rider passed through the mist at dawn, silent, slow, a long coat brushing against the grass. She did not stop. She did not wave. She simply moved forward. Because the past may fade, but some debts are meant to be carried, not by the dead, but by those who once watched, and finally understood.